Hey guys, it's Loony here. So I'm making this guide for Discipline Priest players who are interested in getting into Mythic Plus. As a little intro about myself, I've been playing Discipline Priest and Keys since Season 1 of Shadowlands, and as of last week, I peaked top 31st in the world. I thought this guide would help players who feel overwhelmed by the idea of playing Discipline Priest and Keys. Now, while writing the script for this video, I realized that I actually have a lot to say on this topic, which is why I'll be breaking down this guide into different videos. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comments. I read them all and I do my very best to answer any of the questions directly. You can also reach out to me on my Discord, which should be in the description of the video, in addition to a link to my private Discord as well. Feel free to join the Warcraft Priest Discord as well. People in there are incredibly helpful and will likely be able to answer any questions that you have when it comes to playing a priest. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and comment, and hit the bell icon for more videos. So, as a Discipline Priest, the advantages you bring to a Mythic Plus group are actually plenty, but as a main focus you have your passive damage, which also includes your uncapped AoE from Mindseer, and you also have great cooldowns and utilities to help you deal with different situations. And finally, one of the main advantages you bring as a priest in general is power infusion. You can PI different DPS during their DPS windows in order to maximize their damage, and if you combine your own passive damage with the increased damage you provide through PI on another DPS, you can actually do comparable DPS to a Venthyr Holy Paladin, which do a lot of damage. So those are the great things that come with playing a Discipline Priest in Keys. Now, the problem with Discipline Priests is you have a hard time recovering from failure damage. So if you're playing in a group where lots of people take damage that could be easily avoided, such as stepping out of bad stuff, stepping out of puddles, then you're going to find yourself hemorrhaging your mana if you're trying to correct mistakes. And also, if you don't manage your mana correctly, or you don't play the class correctly or the spec correctly inside the dungeon, then you will find yourself struggling more often than not. Now, as a general premise, as a Discipline Priest, you're depending on atonement healing. What you do is you apply atonement on the tank or the targets that are taking damage, and you spread Purge the Wicked on as many NPCs as you can, and then you Mindseer. This should be your go-to way to heal. That's like your baseline without anyone going through taking any huge damage. Now, it's important to balance when your group needs atonement healing and when you can just depend on that, and when you need to do more direct healing. This is going to change based off of the damage intake of your group and the fixes in place. Now, depending on the missing health of your allies, you might be better off just letting their health come back up through passive atonement damage or atonement transfer. Otherwise, do not hesitate to Shadow Mend. Now, what I do before every pack is I Power Word Shield the tank just to have atonement up on them, and then I spread Purge the Wicked on as many targets as possible, given that they will survive long enough for my damage to tick. Remember that Penance itself also spreads Purge the Wicked, so you can use that as a way to do it as well. If you're attacking more than 3 targets, then after spreading Purge the Wicked, you just start Mind Searing. However, if you're dealing with 1 to 2 targets, then you simply just go through your single target rotation as long as you can. It's important to remember that healer damage is one of the most important factors for timing hierarchies, where every single instance of damage matters. So you want to be squeezing just as much damage from yourself as you possibly can, while also making sure that your allies are healthy. Our atonement appliers are still the same ones that we use from Raid, so Shadow Mend will be used a lot in the middle of pulls if passive atonement healing is not enough. However, I use Power Word Shield as a pre-pull on the tank whenever I believe that atonement damage transfer will be enough to keep them healthy mid-pull. Power Word Radiance is a nice AoE heal whenever there's AoE damage going out, and I can go into the details of how to maximize the healing done from Purge the Wicked, Power Word Shield later in the guide. For now, just know that it's the most efficient way to apply atonement on everyone in the party, so it costs the least amount of mana for the atonement that it applies on everyone. And just as a reminder, this applies for every single priest or every single healer out there when it comes to dungeons. Your job is to not get everyone to 100% health all the time. Your job is to make sure that people have enough health to survive what is currently happening. The most important part of Mythic Plus is the amount of damage that you can contribute. And Disciplined Priests have the ability to dish out quite a bit of damage without sacrificing healing, which is one of our greatest points. We don't have to make a choice. Now, you want to aim for around 5 to 10% of the group's overall damage, and by the end of the run, with some people being able to push well past that. Remember, the most important part is to be aggressive and not to hold any of your cooldowns, and just be as aggressive as you can while making sure your teammates survive. It's not important to get them to 100% health all the time. Just keep that in mind. So let's talk about the damage rotation. You apply and maintain Purge the Wicked on a target, and then you Mind Games if you're Venthyr, into Penance, Mind Blast, Solace. You use those on cooldown all the time. Once those are on cooldown, then you can start spamming Smite as a filler. Once all those abilities are on cooldown, I may play more defensively depending on the incoming damage profile, because Smite itself does not do that much damage, but it still is damage. So it's okay to play defensively once your other abilities are on cooldown. Shadow Word Death is also a very nice execute, but remember that it does no atonement healing, unless you equip the Kiss of Death legendary, which currently is not exactly seeing that much play in Mythic Plus. I personally use Shadow Word Death on cooldown once we're in execute range, regardless of the affix, because it does do quite a bit of damage. Just remember to heal yourself back up, especially in Grievous weeks, because you could hurt yourself, and if you're low when you're Shadow Word Death, when you're casting Shadow Word Death, you might die. So just be aware of how much damage it might potentially do, and if that damage will kill you. On AoE, depending on the level of incoming damage, you will be doing different things. It's generally higher DPS to just go straight into Mindsear, but Mindsear only transfers atonement healing from the damage it causes to one target during its channel. So even if your tank is pulling 20 targets and you're Mindsearing and you have atonement up on one of your allies, they still won't get healed for a lot because it's only going to transfer atonement healing off of the instance of one damage from one target. Meaning that the healing it does is actually quite low, and it's almost non-existent, to be honest. Now, if the damage the group is taking is substantial, what you can do is spread Purge the Wicked on as many mobs as you can, because each instance of damage that each Purge the Wicked does gets transferred into atonement healing. I also want to add that Mindsear and or Purge the Wicked are very commonly going to be your highest DPS abilities by the end of a key, so use those as much as you possibly can. And just as a tip to make sure that you're maximizing your damage, Mindsear beats the damage of Smite at 2 targets, and it beats the damage of Mind Blast, Solace, and normal Penance at 3 targets. So for full optimization, if you're just going for damage, on 2 targets you want to use your short cooldowns, so Mind Blast, Solace, and Penance, and obviously Mind Games if you're still Venthyr. And then you Mindsear if that's on 2 targets. If it's 1 target, then you simply just Smite after using your cooldowns. Now, if you're on 3 targets, you can Mindsear immediately to do the maximum amount of damage, but like I said, Purge the Wicked will not Purge the Wicked will transfer more atonement healing than Mindsear will. The only exception is if you get a Power of the Dark Side proc, which buffs the damage of your Penance by 50%. When you're dealing with 3 targets, Empowered Penance actually does more damage than casting Mindsear. Next, let's talk about the stereotype that all Disciplined Priest players have to deal with. Mana management. Now, you can be a very mana-hungry spec if you're spamming Shadowman to keep your group topped up. Remember to use Power Word Solace on cooldown and to always be prepared for the incoming damage. Mana can be managed in several ways, but the most important things to keep in mind are: find out if you can keep Atonement on your allies who have taken damage so they can get healed passively. and your DPS abilities do not cost nearly as much mana as your healing abilities, so if your allies can be healed through Atonement, this will help out quite a bit. Second is to use your cooldowns aggressively. A target with pain suppression will require a lot less healing than one without pain suppression. Plan your pulls ahead if you're going to be rapturing on certain pulls, because rapture on certain pulls or on all pulls will make it so that you have to heal people less. Shadow Fiend can also help you regenerate your mana, and Barrier is an AoE damage reduction, but you can also be using it on yourself, it's not a big deal. Just be prepared for the damage and press your buttons, do not keep things on cooldown for too long. Mythic Plus dungeons go for a very long time, and you will get your cooldowns back up again, just don't sit on them. And the last important tip that I can give you with regards to mana management is to sneak short drinks between pulls, even if it's just for a couple of seconds. Ask for a mage table before the run starts, or buy pomegranates, or find a mage to give you some conjured food. Whatever you do, just bind the drink button to something that you can spam quickly between pulls and the moment you're out of combat. So the moment you drop combat, you spam the drink button. Even getting like 5 to 10 seconds of drinking between pulls while your group is moving to the next back is overall going to be enough and is going to add up over the course of the dungeon. So you don't exactly have to hold your group back and ask them to wait until you're at 100% mana. Even a couple of seconds of drinking should be more than enough, and they add up over time. Now let's talk about our cooldowns. Now, as a note, you want to be very aggressive with your cooldowns, especially your offensive one. As a Discipline Priest, the more offensive you're being, the more healing you do through Atonement, so it's really a win-win. Your Shadow Fiend does considerable amounts of damage. Remember that anything that buffs our stats also buffs our Shadow Fiend. So use this ability pretty much on cooldown, especially during moments when there's heavy AoE healing. You can use a Radiance on your team, pop your Shadow Fiend, and your Shadow Fiend's damage will transfer through Atonement. It also helps you regenerate your mana. Next, we have Pain Suppression, which is a very strong external. If you know someone is going to be targeted by an ability that does a heavy amount of damage, do not hesitate to Pain Suppression them. It's probably one of the strongest externals in the game. It can be used on the tank if their defensives are down, such as a bear when they don't have Incarn, or a Blood Death Knight who's going into a pack with low runic power, or really any tank who just has downtime between their different damage mitigation abilities. You can also use it on yourself if you are being targeted by an ability and you think you're going to die otherwise. Next, there is Rapture. And this ability is just almost always on cooldown for me. It's a great oh no button that you can pretty much use to make sure your group can survive hard-hitting abilities. You can use it on the move. It essentially gives your team up to like 50-60% more health. So it's pretty strong. Or you can also spam it on your tank if they're being hit really hard. You can just keep spamming it multiple times on them to give them shields. And remember, you can cast this while you're on the move. So if there's a mechanic for some sorts where you can't stand still and damage the boss or heal your allies, then you can just Rapture them and they'll be okay. A trick that I use for Rapture is I Power Word Radiance right before, because that applies Atonement on my allies, which also means that any subsequent shields that I put on them using Rapture will be bigger because of the way our Mastery works, where we do more healing to targets that already have Atonement applied on them. Next, there is Power Word Barrier, which is a strong damage reduction cooldown for moments of heavy incoming damage to your whole party. But it's not exactly a waste if you use it on one person. It's better getting a 25% damage reduction on one person than getting 0 value from it the entire dungeon. Like, it's okay to just use it for one person. Next, if you're Kyrian, we have Boon of the Ascended, which is possibly one, if not the strongest cooldown that we have. When paired with the legendaries of Spheres Harmony, it goes down from being a 3-minute cooldown to 2-minute cooldown, assuming you can get to 30 stacks, which you really shouldn't have any issues getting if you just do the proper rotation, which I will demonstrate. Once it goes down to 2 minutes, you can pair it with trinkets such as Soul Letting Ruby from Theater of Pain. I was able to peak something like 15k DPS on an AoE pack when I paired it with my Shadow Fiend. We should be unlocking the mechanic of Soulbind in the next couple of days, which will bring it down to a 1-minute cooldown and further boosting our DPS, meaning that there is no excuse whatsoever that we should ever be holding Boon if we're going to be getting it down to 1 minute in AoE situations. Just use that whenever you can, because your higher DPS will also translate into higher HPS. Finally, Power Infusion. You should almost always be using Power Infusion on the DPS during their cooldowns. Depending on the group, some DPS will do better when they're PI'd on AoE packs, while others will do better in single target fights. Getting an add-on or a weak aura that alerts you when your party members pop a cooldown is highly encouraged. I personally use the Zen Tracker weak aura. Alternatively, you can use a weak aura that makes health bars of players glow when they whisper you PI. Now, I ask some of my players that I play with quite frequently to macro a whisper, or to whisper me PI the moment they click whatever or whenever they press their damage cooldown. Now, if you're in a pug and you don't know who to PI, what I personally do is I wait until the first couple of pulls and I see which DPS is pressing their buttons and doing the highest damage so far, and that person gets PI'd for the rest of the fight on cooldown, essentially. Especially if I know which cooldowns they're popping would benefit the most from PI. Okay guys, thank you for listening. So, seeing as how this video is already longer than what I anticipated to be, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to be making a second part where I mention things like talents, secondaries, covenants, legendaries, soulbinds, conduits, the different utility that you have, what you can do with different affixes as well. So stay tuned for the second Mythic Plus video. And if you have any questions about what I mentioned over here, please feel free to comment them down. I'll try my very best to answer any of the questions that you have. You can also reach out to me through my Discord or just join my server and ask questions there. I'll leave links to both of them in the description and also my Discord tag. And then finally, there's also the Warcraft Priest Discord that you can reach out to, where people there are pretty helpful, and I'm pretty sure they can answer any of the questions that you have. So, yeah, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for the next video. Cheers!